Hey everybody, I'm Rick Beato. In today's episode, I talk with Michael McDonald. Now, is there anyone with a more recognizable voice than Michael McDonald? Between that, his keyboard skills, and his songwriting, these things together have made an undeniable impact on popular music. From his groundbreaking work with the Doobie Brothers to his brilliant solo career, to his significant contributions as a background vocalist for artists like Steely Dan and Christopher Cross, McDonald's journey is rich with melody and innovation. Here's my interview. Michael, welcome.
Thanks, Rick. Great to be here.
Tell me about your upbringing.
Well, my dad was a singer, and so I remember my earliest memories of him singing, and when I was about 4, from that time on, I hung with him. If I hung with my dad at all, it wasn't playing ball in the yard. It was singing in some saloon in St. Louis, and with one of his favorite piano players in town, and he was, fairly fairly popular in the city of St. Louis as the guy who, showed up. I never saw my dad take a drink of alcohol, but he loved to go to the bars and sing with his piano player buddies, and I would always tag along. I think when I was little, my mother would even let him take me after dinner, figuring I would probably be the best chance of him not getting in any more trouble than necessary, if he had me in tow, But my earliest memories of my dad were from behind, watching him with his big ears at the microphone singing, and I would sit back behind the piano player on the windowsill and with my Shirley Temple, and my dad would be singing, and people would, I could tell how people really enjoyed his voice, and it meant a lot to them to hear these songs. And my dad was not just a good singer, but he seemed to be able to put a song over,
And what kind of music was he singing?
It was mostly, old standards, ragtime songs, but he was an Irish tenor, so he had that kind of, a lot of the old Irish American songs, and Danny Boy was his big number, and of course, everybody loved to hear him sing Danny Boy. And if I had $1 for every time I heard somebody, yell, "Bob, sing Danny Boy," I'd be a rich man today. But yeah, that was my first start, and I was about 5, I think, when one day I just put my Shirley Temple down on the windowsill and walked up behind the piano player and tugged on her sleeve. Ida Burns was her name. And I let it be known that I wanted to sing a song, and she just kind of looked at me, and she looked at my dad, and she goes, "Well, what do you want to sing, honey?" And I said, "Well, love is a many splendored thing, And she kind of reared back and looked at me like, "What?" And she laughed, So she, kind of figured out what key I might sing it in, and played this little intro and this can't miss it starting note, and nodded to me, and I started singing the song For All I Was Worth. And I think I'd heard it on a Mario Alonso 78 record in my Aunt Mame's house, Once I learned how to work the Victrola, I would play it over and over again. And so I knew every word of the song, and just sang my heart out. And when it was done, the audience, there was a split second where they just stared in utter disbelief, not because I was good, but just the sight of a 5-year-old singing this song was hilarious, and they burst into laughter, and started applauding, out of kindness, and I thought they thought I was really good. I was forever smitten by this whole idea of singing and people enjoying hearing me sing,
So would you say your parents were really encouraging
as
far as music was
Our
concerned?
house was a house full of music all the time. My parents, both of them, my mom couldn't carry a tune, God bless her, but she knew it, Once in a while we could coax her into singing the Hokey Pokey or something just so we could all laugh. But she loved music as much as my dad, and she cut a wide berth for him with it, he'd come back from the war, we'd been out of World War II, maybe 10 years, and he was in the Pacific. And I think back then for him, it was a large part of his, what we call now PTSD. It was to just keep moving. And you know, he always had one foot out the door, you know, my old man. So for me as a kid, I always kind of think of my childhood and with my dad as running to keep up with him, you know. Where he was going out, I wanted to know where, and I wanted to know if I could go, you know. And so he would take me along with him to these places. And
would you guys say you'd had similar voices?
in a way, yes. You know, although my dad's voice wasn't maybe as raspy or whatever you want to call it. I sang a lot of rock and roll over the years. And,
yeah.
But we both have the same range, I think. I'm more of a tenor than I think people give me credit for, you know, or they don't think of me that way. But my range is more of a tenor range, and my dad was a tenor also.
When you sing high, are you always singing in full voice, or is there a falsetto voice that's more of a head voice?
It is more of a head voice for me. It's not clearly a falsetto, but it's more of a head voice. Kind of half and half, you know. And it's something I developed singing in bars growing up and playing with bands. I learned real early that I could wear my voice out if I wanted, because I wanted to be like Mitch Ryder and James Brown, and I wanted to sing like Ray Charles. I wanted to be like all those guys who were kind of, you know, gospel screamers, singers, you know, and but you know, I really didn't have the vocal stamina to do it. And what I learned later was most of these guys did the same thing I developed later, you know.
But it sounds like a full voice.
It sounds like a full voice.
Yeah.
It's you know, something that rock and roll singers from the past and gospel singers, you know, it's a head voice they develop, you know, to get up into the upper ranges. And you know, I think for most of us who don't develop that, we wear out pretty early.
Yeah.
You know.
I've heard people burn out their falsetto from singing in a full voice in a high register.
Yeah, I did. I wore out my falsetto for a while. I don't even know how, but after a while, I had no more like real falsetto. So I leaned all the more on that head voice of mine. You know.
I'd like to take a second to talk to you about this channel. Believe it or not, 57% of the people that watch here regularly are not subscribed. So I would encourage you to hit the subscribe button now. This will help me get even more of my dream guests in the future. Thank you.
When you were a kid, did you have piano lessons?
My dad decided that I should take piano lessons, but I think it had more to do with him getting an extra night out than it did with any real interest in me playing the piano.
Uh-huh.
And in fact, my mother was already suspicious from the beginning because we didn't have a piano. So why in the hell was I going to piano lessons? But, you know, he found a piano. Him and his friend brought it to the house, and in the house. And I can still remember that day. It was like this big solid oak behemoth. They struggled to get that thing across the lawn and into the house, and I was following them and banging out the Metal Hymn of the Republic with 2 fingers. My dad was swatting at me, telling me to get the hell out of the way, and, you know, it was, you know, typical bedlam in our house, but it was exciting, you know, and they somehow got it downstairs, and I spent the next few years, you know, I never really was much of a piano player. I mean, I can play a little bit of piano. I can muscle my way into certain other keys if I have to, you know. But I never really had that great interest in being a piano
like a classical piano
player,
player,
or even a jazz musician or anything. I just liked pop music, and I liked to pick songs off the radio. And most of what I knew about piano, I learned to memorize songs. I couldn't tell you the theory behind it. I just, you know, I knew that this was the chord progression of that song and this key, and, you know. I was always very lazy at my, you know, my acumen as a piano player. You know.
Do you read at all? Nothing,
really,
right?
No, yeah. I can read slowly, you know, I can kind of look at a piece of music and eventually figure out what's on there, but, you know.
Did you have any other instruments around the house that anyone played?
Yeah, my grandmother had given me a tenor banjo, a beautiful old Gibson tenor banjo. It was a off-brand called Oriole, you know, and Gibson made it, you know. You could buy the same banjo, it would either say the Gibson or, you know, Oriole, and they were probably made in the 20s, you know. and it was my grandfather's banjo. So I got my Mel Bay book, you know, and I learned a few chords, and I started to back up my dad, you know, when he sang. And from that point on, we sang all around St. Louis at different functions, you know. Wherever he sang or played, you know, he would usually drag me along if I could do it, you know. And so that was my early musical experience till I ventured off with some kids in the neighborhood and started a band, you know.
Okay, and what was that band?
That was, early on it was called Mike and the Majestics. Why Mike and the Majestics, I have no idea. We were all, you know, lived within a block of each other, you know.
Did you play originals? Did you play covers?
No, we played covers. You know, in fact, the first 3 songs that we ever learned were some Beatles songs, you know, that were actually covers by the Beatles, like Boys and Rock and Roll Music, and, you know, oddly they all sounded pretty much alike, you know, and we rehearsed those 3 songs for hours, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And the poor guys, our drummer's poor mother, you know, had to listen to that for, you know, till finally she'd call it.
Did you have a PA system back then?
No, we went through one little Epiphone amp. The drummer's older brother was off in the service, so we were using all his gear while he was gone. And we ran our microphone and both guitars through this one amp and with a Y cord, you know, that kept crapping out. And our drummer just, you know, he was the only one that actually had a full set of drums, you know, real equipment. The rest of us were faking it. And I was playing a shop class, a guitar a guy had made in shop class, and he was in Korea, somewhere on the border of North and South Korea in the service. And so while he was gone, his mother lent me his guitar, you know. So, you know, that's how we started out, you know. And eventually another guy joined our band who actually had some equipment. And so we had 2 amps, and, you know, went on from there, you know.
When's the first time you made a recording, that you were actually in a recording studio?
When I was in a group called the Sheratons, we recorded some songs. They were cover songs. We recorded down at Monument Records in Nashville on a trip to Nashville we took. And then we recorded Musicland USA. It was a label in St. Louis, and it was a studio in St. Louis.
What year would that have been, would you say?
That would have been like 66, something like that.
Okay.
And then the first time we recorded a record with the idea of putting the record out, I think, any serious, you know, idea of, you know, a record release was for a label Arch Records. And it was with a group called the Del Reys, and they were a band from the East Side that we did a cover of Always Something There to Remind Me by Burt Bacharach. And we cut it in this guy's home. Nick Charles, that was his name. He was a producer he co-produced it with a guy named Steve Cropper.
Okay.
And Steve was a young guy then, but he was already, you know, famous and had already, you know, made a name for himself with Stax Volt Records. And this label was a subsidiary of Stax Volt in Memphis. So,
okay.
So Steve arranged some horns and put the horns on the record, and as fate would have it, it was the Memphis Horns who put the horns on our record.
Unbelievable.
And I would 10 years later be touring with them with the Doobie Brothers, you know. But yeah, it was, and we got some traction on the local R&B station.
Did you like going into the studio? Was it fun? Was it interesting to you? Or was it
was
nerve-wracking?
interesting, but I had if I think back on it, it just seemed like I had no idea what was going on, you know. I mean, you know, I didn't really have any great interest in what was going on around me. I just figured, you know, I'm a singer, and so I sing.
And would this be live takes, or would you overdub?
Yeah, pretty much live takes. You
Okay.
know, everything was live back then, you know. And so the band would play and I would sing, you know. And so we finally get this record. It has a label, and you know, it just was all very exciting, really, you know.
Where did you end up moving to where you're singing, auditioning for Steely Dan?
Well, I was playing with pretty much those groups, you know, groups like that around the St. Louis area. You know, we're pretty much, your horizon was, you know, what are the good paying gigs and how do you get them? And those gigs where the radio stations were on board and advertised the gigs, that was like the stuff. That was the shit, you know. And then we started to venture out by way of, we went with an agency out of Champaign, Illinois. Blytham agency, and they booked all the college towns in the Midwest. And so we started to travel quite a bit to these little college towns. And we started to kind of build a little bit of a following, you know. One of the agents at this agency was a guy that by then was pretty much, you know, had taken over the whole place, and his name was Irving Azoff.
Oh my gosh.
He was our agent. Irving was like 19 then.
Oh my God.
And so, you know, he kind of saw the potential of playing these colleges and with these bands, and I know back then he had eyes beyond Champaign, Illinois.
So Irving Azoff was booking you to do what? Were you playing actually on the college campuses, frat parties, or
mostly
what were you doing?
little watering holes in the college towns.
Okay,
you know.
and these would be how many set gigs? 3 set gigs? What
Oh
would
yeah,
you do?
two sets, 3 sets. You know, we earned our money. You know, playing, you know, we. Like I said, we would play. Usually, a lot of times with other bands. You know, there would be a couple bands playing that night, and so it was never too taxing. But a lot of traveling, and you know, we spent a lot of time in our Kline van. One of us laying on top of the gear for about 100 miles,
Right.
and never having the right stickers. You know, never having. You know, the tires were bald. You know. We hadn't changed the oil. Well, I remember one time the truck just shut down. It stopped and it seized, you know, the motor.
Sure.
And we had to be towed in, and the guy looked at it, and he looked at us, and he goes, there's no oil in the engine. And we're looking at each other, you know. He goes, did you ever change the oil? Yeah. We go, no.
No, you have to do that?
It came from the factory with whatever oil it had in it, you know. And so we learned a little bit about mechanics 101 and how to stay on the road a little better. But that was what we did, you know. And we were all about just playing music and not having to grow up if we could help it, you know. Most of us had dropped out of high school. And we were just following the music business, wherever it took us, you know.
Okay, so Irving Azoff, how does he factor into this then? Is he part of this story about how your career kept progressing?
Yeah, very much. You know, I was playing one of the gigs in Champaign, Illinois, and Irving was kind of more of a mentor, you know, with all the bands. And, you know, it was kind of through his eyes that we saw that, you know, wow, there is such a thing as California where you go make records, and there is a record business beyond what we do. And, you know, so he took us in and recorded some demos with us, you know, basically recording songs we played in the clubs, you know, and a couple of originals, you know. The minute he sensed that we had any originals, it was like, well, we need to record those, you know. So it was in one of the clubs in Champaign where Rick Gerard, who grew up in Champaign, Urbana, on a farm, he was a producer at that time with RCA, who had some success with Surrealistic Pillow or Jefferson Airplane, and Jose Feliciano's Light My Fire album, Harry Nilsson's Aerial Ballet record. He produced all those records, and so I was a big fan of his.
Yeah,
And he came to hear us play and wanted to take me out to California, do some demos, and hopefully sign me to RCA Records. And they sent me a contract, and Irving looked at it and said, I wouldn't sign that. You know, it's not a good contract. You just wait. You're going to get where you want to go. You know, don't sign the first piece of paper somebody puts in front of you. Of course, I didn't listen. You know, because I thought this might be my one chance.
I thought this would be a great thing but you signed it anyways.
I signed it anyways.
Okay.
You know? But I took his advice. I remember talking to one of the record execs at RCA at the time, and I'm going, you know, I've been advised to hold on to my publishing, so I'd like to keep my publishing out of this deal, you know, not because, you know, I was signing my firstborn, you know, I was over everything, you know. And the guy goes, oh, well, we can't do that. He goes, you know, we can't put your record out legally if we don't have the publishing.
Oh my God.
And so I kind of figured that wasn't true, but I wasn't going to rock the boat too much, you know. And, I figured this is my one shot to actually make a record, so I did, you know. And you know, as fortune would have it, they scrapped the record before it even got released, and the rest was history. But the one wonderful thing was Rick Gerard used me on all his sessions at the time to kind of keep me alive out in California. And so I got in the union and I made session checks, and I worked just enough. I did some chord charts for him for all his sessions, and he would always put me on the session. I had no business being on that session, And I started to meet guys like Michael and then the real session players in LA at the time, and it was a great education, one I wouldn't have gotten any other way, And, so I started to kind of at least learn the etiquette of playing in the studio with other musicians and what that was about, how different that was from playing clubs when it was just like, 1, 2, 3, go. First one to the bridge gets a solo, And it was like, it was a different world of finesse and abilities, So it opened my eyes quite a bit,
Was this mainly as a singer?
I was signed mostly as a singer. Yeah, it certainly wasn't but as an artist, songwriter, singer, and I had a bunch of songs that made up an album. I had 12 songs. I think I was of a mind of quantity more than quality back then. I wanted to write as many songs as I could, And so we distilled whatever I had down to 12 songs and recorded them. And they spared no expense. I mean, it was orchestras, violins, background singers, brass, the best musicians money could buy, arrangers, and, I don't think all of that combined did much to help those songs.
Okay.
but it was fun to make the record, and it was, it was an experience like no other I've ever had or ever had since, really, But like I say, I got dropped from the label before the record came out. But
which was a good thing.
Yeah, I think in hindsight it was a blessing for everyone.
Okay, so how did you start getting on all these big records, like these Steely Dan records?
I met a lot of musicians through the club scene. I became friends with a girl who was a great bass player, and she knew a lot of these guys that played the club scene and played. She was one of those people that knew where to get the PA and knew how to get the gigs, and so. I attached myself to her very quickly, and all of a sudden I was working, and I was meeting other guys, and we played a lot of the clubs in the Valley, back then, and it was really through her that I met ultimately Jeff Porcaro, Max Bennett, and some of the guys I had already been doing sessions with. We had mutual friends, and. But I started to get out into the club scene a little more, and through her and some of the associations I made playing clubs. And it was really on just one of those casuals. I remember she had come to me and said, I got a gig. It's during Christmas, it's coming up, and it's for a rap party for this Universal TV show. And it's going to pay pretty good. You want to do it with me? And I said, sure, yeah, of course, And so she was going to organize this whole gig, and, we were going to rehearse, and, she would get all the, musicians. I was on board for this, and but a couple months at least before the gig ever happened, she got the chance to audition with the Harry James Orchestra in Las Vegas.
Okay.
She had to kind of do that because she had a daughter, and, this could be a gig that lasted for years, And so, she wanted to go do that audition, and she said, look, I'm going to leave this gig in your lap. And she goes, but I know you can't procrastinate. You've got to take care of there's a lot that has to be done. You got to get gear. You got to get the songs, make charts for everybody. You got to find the musicians. You got to rehearse the band. You got to be ready to do this. You got to, you can't wait till the last minute. I said, no, right. I know, I got it, So about a week before the gig, I don't have anyone, anything, And I'm, just sitting in my apartment, freaking out, going, she's going to kill me. There's no way I can get this together for this gig, And I got one guy, and he was a friend of mine, a sax player, Steve Leeds. And Steve and I were sitting there, smoking a joint probably at the time, and I'm just, venting, like, there's no way this is going to happen. It's you and me. That's all we have. And he goes, man, calm down. He goes, I know some cats. They're doing an album project right now, and they work typically from like 10 in the morning to 6 and then they call it, They don't work into the evenings much, and they'd probably be available, and they'd probably do it, And I'm going, I mean, with session players? He goes, yeah. He goes, well, and he told me that they're doing a Steely Dan project. I'm like, wow, amazing. I go, well, I can't pay guys like that. This gig's not making that kind of money, And he goes, nah, they don't need the money. He goes, they'll do it just for fun, probably. And my brother can probably find us the gear we need, PA and all that. And it happened to be Andy Leeds, who owned the power station, or Leeds Music, So this whole thing just developed in minutes, to where it looked like I was going to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, But I'm thinking, no, there's no way this is going to happen. This is too easy, But, I said, well, how, when can these guys rehearse? And he goes, Mike, these guys don't need to rehearse.
Right.
You just make the charts, pick some songs that everybody kind of knows already, and they'll be all right, So I make these chord charts. I'm listening to records, learning the lyrics to songs, for the next week or so. We get to these guys just show up. And it's Jeff Porcaro and Mike Porcaro on bass. Ken Henry played guitar. I'm on piano, and another guy came and sat in on keyboards. His name was David Page. So, it couldn't have gone better. Given the recipe for disaster that it was.
But this is random, really.
Very random. Yeah. And it was about a year later, cut to the chase, that I get the same girl, Brandy, goes, Jeff Porcaro called me. He's looking for you. I want you to give him a call. He gives me his number. So I'm like, okay. So I call the number, and it's Jeff. I hadn't seen him in a year, since that gig. And he goes, hey, man, Steely Dan is, we're finally getting it together. We're going on the road with the Pretzel Logic album. And he talked about making that record, that very track, that night at the gig,
Mm-hmm.
And, this is a year later. He goes, so we're putting a band together. And I thought about you, playing we're looking for somebody who can play some miscellaneous keyboards and, can sing some backgrounds. And I said, sure. I said, I'm figuring, well, I have to go to school on their material. And I had done about half the auditions I ever did. I never got hired, So, and that's with me learning their songs.
Right.
So I'm going, I got to learn their stuff, And I go, well, so when are you thinking about doing this? He goes, right now. He goes, you need to come down here now, So I go, oh my God, So I throw my Wurlitzer in my Ford Pinto, and I drive to Modern Music, and these guys help me unload my piano, set it up. That's all the gear I have, They start teaching me these songs. Donald starts teaching me these songs and what he'd like me to play on piano and the background parts. And in some miraculous, loaves and fishes kind of moment, I'm learning all these songs as we go. And about 3 or 4 hours into this rehearsal, I'm starting to think, do I have this gig? Is it, am I they're investing an awful lot of time in me, And I think at one point I looked at Jeff, and he's going to, but I had no idea whether I was hired or they were going to say, yeah,
So you're playing stuff off like Can't Buy a Thrill and Pretzel Logic. You're learning those
songs I'd never heard
songs.
in my life,
Right.
by them, And
Yeah.
so I'm learning this stuff and committing it to memory, and we're running it down. And next day I show up at rehearsal again, and we run the whole show down. And by the 3rd or 4th day of rehearsal, I'm figuring pretty much that I'm in the band, And we went out on the road, through the United States, touring, and we started on the East Coast and playing. And I learned pretty quickly that Steely Dan had this, regional following on the East Coast. They were, it was like, kind of like a home team coming back to town for the championships or something. It was like, we played in New York. It was like, oh, wow, okay, this is what Steely Dan is all about,
Okay, who was in the band, this live band?
It was the original Steely Dan lineup of Jimmy Hodder on drums, Denny Diaz on guitar,
Yeah.
Walter on bass, Donald on keyboards. Royce Jones played percussion and sang, beautiful voice, and me on keyboards, Jeff Porcaro on drums. And that was it, So, it was all happening so quickly, and, it was just such a random kind of an event for me. And about, I don't know, gosh, a few months later, or a month or so at least later, I'm back home. And I found out in a couple of weeks the band had broken up. Everybody was fired. And I think I was at Denny Diaz's house when the news came down. And he goes, "Did you hear Donald Walter, the band's disbanded?" And I'm sitting there with Denny and we're talking. And he was very philosophical about it. He goes, man, I think it's what these guys need to do to progress from where they're at now, I'm like, really? And there you have it. It was over as soon as it began, and I'm back at the Trojan Room in Glendale playing Do It Again for a couple of barflies, at the bar. I was also playing some Doobie Brothers songs, like Listen to the Music and Long Train Running with this bar band.
Yeah.
When I got the call, and I had gone in. I continued to go in the studio with Steely Dan to do backgrounds and stuff. And
you sang a lot. You sang on some songs, and Katie lied.
Yeah, Katie lied, and they even put my picture on the record, which I thought was awfully nice, and it was a wonderful experience. But it was during that time that Jeff Baxter was out on the road. He was trying to set the record for how long anyone could be on the road, I think, He'd leave, one band's tour would end, he was working with it, he'd just jump on another tour, get on the phone from his hotel room and meet them in the next town, So he was on the road, I think, for 2 years straight, And in that period of time, when I was back at the Trojan Room, he calls and he says, "Hey man, what are you doing?" He goes, "Tom Johnston needs to take a break, and we've got all these gigs that the band is left with, and they want to finish out, I thought about you. I told the guys that, you could probably handle coming in, playing some keyboards and some of the vocals, and, wow. He goes, "Can you meet us in New Orleans?" I said, "Sure, when? Tomorrow." I said, "Well, I don't really have enough money to get to New Orleans." He goes, "You got a ticket waiting for you, and there'll be some per diem when you get here, and just
oh my God.
put your keyboard in baggage and come on down." So I somehow I got there on a flight, and the roadies were there to meet me. And
now you knew some of the songs from covering
I knew
them.
from playing. I knew two of them, from playing them in clubs, and so we again, we rehearsed. It was probably a 2-hour show in 2 days, and I had little pieces of paper all over my keyboard of, lyrics and stuff, and I remember the first gig very well. It was Shreveport, Louisiana. We rehearsed in New Orleans and went to Shreveport to play, and my dad and I drove out there, and my dad was living in New Orleans at the time. When we found the place, and it was a big hockey arena,
Mm-hmm.
and we're looking for the stage door, the back door, of the place. And with a round building, that's kind of difficult because,
Right.
What's the back door, We found it finally where the trucks were loading in, and I go in there, and this place was huge. It was cavernous, and we're doing a sound check. And the last time my dad had heard me play was like at a bowling alley in East St. Louis, or Belleville, Illinois or something. So this was all new to him, and he's just looking around like, somebody's paying all these people to do all this stuff, And, we had food, and it was just this whole nother world, But I was always grateful that my dad, like I remember when he left that night, it was kind of bittersweet because I hadn't seen him. I'd always struggled to make time, to find time to be, see my dad over the years. He, towards the, one of my last formative years growing up, he didn't live at home with us, and he was remarried and had another family, and so we stayed in touch, and we were always close, but it was at a distance. So when I felt kind of strangely vindicated that he got to see me play this gig, and it was, it was as much a surprise to me with Steely Dan. We played smaller venues, and we had a lot of fun, and crowds were great. But these guys were playing in like 10,000 people,
huge
15,000 people. And I remember I went up on stage to sit with him, and the house lights were up. Nobody knew who I was, so it wasn't like, I was giving anything away, And we were sitting in these folding chairs, and then all of a sudden the lights went out, and the band started coming up. So I got to go, I got up and walked out with the band, and we hit I think it was Jesus Just All Right With Me, the drum intro, and the crowd went up, it was like a roar that, you know, it took me by surprise, and my dad too. And this was a whole nother experience of anything he'd seen me involved with, you know, certainly. So by the time he left that night, he was going back to New Orleans and I was going on with the band. I felt like, you know, well, maybe at least he doesn't think this was all for naught, you know. I think he was always worried. He was always telling me, you know, look, you got to get your GED, you know. you know, you want to get your high school diploma because, you know, this is great for now, but, you know, you never know. It's, you know. So I think he thought, well, maybe this is a real gig, and, you know, I'm going to, you know, have a chance at really doing something with all this, you know. So
then you became a writer in addition to singing with the band.
I was having dinner at Tyran's house, you know, I went over there for dinner, you know, and I was in San Francisco rehearsing with the band. He said, why don't you come over to the house tonight, listen to records? And he had just bought a 4-track recorder.
Okay.
So he goes, you want to put something down? I went, well, sure. And all I could think of was this little song I had written, a little melody I'd written. And I, you know, we put it down, and I had some words, and so I sang it. And he was having a ball engineering the whole thing, you know. We made this, I didn't even know we made a demo. He mixed it down later. And it was a song called The Losing It.
Yeah.
Which was the first track I ever cut with the Doobie Brothers. The most unlikely song in the world that the Doobie Brothers might ever do, you know. But Tyran played it for Ted. And
Ted Templeman.
Ted liked it.
Yeah.
And Pat had already kind of put a bug in Ted's ear about, you know, this guy's been touring with us. I think he's a pretty good singer. I think he could bring something to this next record. And, you know, Tom was coming back for the record, but Pat, you know, wanted to see if Ted could, you know, see his way to involving me on the record. You know, I was totally amazed by all this. And of course, Jeff was my initial advocate with the whole thing. And so we just started recording tracks, and it was basically one of those things where I think with every album we ever did, and I think it's probably the same for the guys before I ever joined them, was, you know, you use all your best songs on the last record, and the next thing you know, there's another record due, and you got to start writing anything you can come up with, you know, and you know, by the grace of God, you come up with something that, you know, maybe makes the next record, you know.
So the title of the next record, Taking It to the Streets.
Taking It to the Streets. And that was a song I had written when I was still doing clubs, you know. In fact, I remember writing basically the crux of that song at a club gig. I was driving to a gig, and I could hear the intro in my head, and I didn't really know what it was, because until I got to a piano and sussed out the chords. You know?
Yeah.
I didn't even know if it worked, really, but I remember thinking it was, I could kind of hear it as a gospel thing, and I thought, you know, by the time I came up with the chorus of the song and, you know, whatever the song, the body of the song, I thought, well, you know, if I was going to cut this, I would maybe cut it in a church with a choir and a rhythm section, and really go for that as a gospel thing, you know. But it was the only thing I really had besides Losing End, and so they were going, well, what are the songs you got? Ted was wondering, you know. So I just started playing this. Ted liked it, and Pat liked it, and we started playing it down with his band, and it was kind of a whole other animal. It was kind of it was still kind of gospel, of course,
yeah,
but kind of more with a rock edge,
yeah,
you know. And there was probably a couple other songs that Pat and I wrote together, and we started to put this. Tommy had a song, and I think Tyran even had a song on that album. We just started putting together as many things as we could, you know, to come up with a 10-song to 12-song album.
I want to play that for a second. I hearing when I hear that? Is that a live take with a vocal overdubbed?
I remember singing that live. I think I probably redid the vocal later. You know, many times we tried to. I would always have to sing some kind of guide track, you know, or any of us when we were doing our songs, you know, just to kind of keep track of where we were, you know.
How does the arrangement even come together with the staggered bass? So on the piano,
that would have been Tyran's, you know, part that he would come up with, you know, and Pat and Jeff, they all came up with their own parts, and I would just play the song down for them. And we might discuss what could happen here or what could happen there, but...
Did they think it was odd, though? Because with even these voicings here that you're playing, when it starts with what's like F minor over G, and then it goes...
Major to...
Yeah, F to C, and then it goes down to like a D7 with the G, and then that D, then the F sharp drops down to F there. Yeah. Did they say, what are those chords? Because it's really...
Well, I think once they learned it, it was pretty self-explanatory. You know, it's not a progression you haven't heard before.
No,
but
the way that the arrangement,
yeah,
and then the with did they just improvise the parts to it?
Pretty much, yeah. I think everybody kind of improvised their own part, or just kind of saw where they could, you know, join in, and that's pretty much the way we worked. You know, it wasn't like any of us. You know, in later years, poor Jeff and poor Keith, you know, we would butt heads because I would start to try to tell them what to play. You know?
Right.
You know, and then that, you know, that had diminishing returns. You know, but no fault of theirs. But you know, but yeah, you know, in the early days, we just kind of I would play a song, you know, down like a, and everybody just.
So you jam on it for a while.
Yeah, we would just kind of suss it out, and you know, I would know what the form of the song is and what the words were going to be.
Yeah.
But I kind of more in the beginning left it up to the guys to come up with, to tell me what they thought their part should be. You know?
So, but it would start with you doing a demo of the song, just playing it for them and singing it in the studio.
Yeah.
Everybody's kind of sitting around, mic'd up, or are you doing this in a rehearsal space first?
It keeps you running. I recorded in Jeff's garage first with him. All he had was this crappy little piano. It was like a Casio or something. You know?
Okay.
And it had this god-awful piano sound, you know, which is what Ted liked that when we got to, he goes, I love that piano sound. So we had to go out and find one of those somewhere.
One of the crappy pianos.
Yeah, you know, so this little Sound City electronic piano, you know. And the kind of thing you would buy your 5-year-old just to learn to play piano on, you know. And we used it on the record because it sounded like the demo, you know.
Right. Most of the stuff there probably was played during a live take, right? You count it off, or there's probably a couple of overdubs.
No, the tracks themselves were usually all of us in the studio playing a song.
And no click track, right?
No, we didn't use click tracks.
You didn't use click tracks back then?
No.
Okay, so how far apart are you?
We were usually in a large room with baffling, you know, like these, probably like that thing behind you there.
Yeah.
Between us, you know, and those do a remarkable job of
isolating,
separating, you know, what's coming out of, well, the amps we would put off in these ISO booths, you know, the little small rooms where you could do a vocal, and a lot of times, like, that's where, like, for instance, if I wasn't playing, I would be in the ISO booth singing to, you know, with the hopes that if we get a vocal, and if that's the vocal, it'll be isolated enough from all the other instruments. But because I played on all the stuff, we was typically a mic like this and some kind of baffling on the keyboard to keep what was out in the room from coming into.
So this could conceivably have been a live take.
It would have been into headphones, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and but yeah, we would, you know, baffle me off as much as possible, and what the drums I was hearing for the most part would be in my headphones.
Okay.
You know, not in the room. You know.
Would you do a few takes of a song like this, for example?
Yeah. Typically the drummer would be in the ISO booth so that his drums didn't bleed in and everything. But yeah, we would do a couple takes, and then Ted would say, "Why don't you guys come on in and listen?" And you know, that either meant you're not getting it, and we need to talk about this, or I think we got it, you know.
Would it sound like that when you were listening? That's
Pretty
what it
much.
sounded like,
Yeah,
right?
pretty much. Yeah, that track pretty much sounds just exactly like how we
Did you
played it.
think to yourself, wow, this sounds amazing. This is going to be a massive hit?
No, but you know, there was, I think there always was a time when you were recording where if something sounded like it was really working,
Yeah.
there was that feeling you'd get. It was like in your gut, you kind of an excitement where you go, wow, you know, that shit sounds good. You know? You know? And I had one of those moments with when the intro started, you know, because it was loud, it was on the big speakers.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you know, the intro comes in, and I remember Bobby Kline was standing next to me, and I'm listening to it, and I could see him looking at me like, you know, and I think it was him that he said, that shit sounds good, you know. and I kind of went, yeah, it's kind of cool, you know. And so, you know, it had that moment. We had that moment with that track that, you know, felt like, wow, we're on to something, you know. I probably went in and replaced the vocal that I did live, you know. So many of those vocals I did live, I wish we could have kept. Because when I was playing and singing the song, there was something about the connection between singing it and playing it that was always better than I could ever do when I was standing up at the microphone singing to the track.
Did Ted know that, that sounds amazing?
Yeah, Ted was always he was so much always about the business of, you know, I mean, it wasn't like Ted ever sat around going, wow, this is great. You know, I mean, he was usually on to the next, like, okay, now here's what we got to do, you know.
Okay.
And, you know, and if he liked something, that was typically the most sign that you got that he liked it, you know. All right, I think we got it. Now, you know, you want it, what do you got to fix, you know? And, you know, let's get the fixes done. And then, you know, now what's the next overdub, you know?
And how long would you spend on a song, typically?
Well, you know, back then we were always pretty cognizant of what it was costing us to be in the studio, you know. Although you wouldn't have known it because we lived in Amigo studios, you know. Probably most of the sleep I got in those years was on the floor of Amigo studios. You know.
Okay.
You know, we always were trying to get the tracks quickly so we could get as many as we could in a day, you know. And so we would try to get all the overdubs we could. And then we would worry about the finer points on the day of overdubs that would be forthcoming down the road, you know.
So to go from kind of added guy in the Doobie Brothers to having the title track on this record, and really a pretty, I would say, radical change in the sound of the band.
Yeah, well, you know, that's always been a funny subject for me because I think if you listen to the Doobie Brothers music prior to when I joined them, what you heard was probably one of the most diverse bands.
Incredibly diverse.
Yeah, you would ever have heard in pop music, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they were doing stuff that was everything from like slack key instrumentals to like Blackwater, which was kind of like a drone
Completely
blues
different
thing, you know.
Yes.
Ragtime even, you know.
Yeah.
Tommy's stuff, which was always very rock, but very also R&B, you know. And he had that, he always, you know, straddled that line between rhythm and blues and rock and roll, you know, because by virtue of writing it on a guitar, you know, I think had a lot to do with that. But and his vocal sensibilities were very much R&B, even though, you know, he was writing and singing these rock songs, you know.
So you would say that you were just kind of an added...
I was just another evolution of a band that was always pretty much exercising their penchant for eclectic collections of songs for any one album, you know. That was also the thing back in those days. And most albums you heard in the 70s, if you listen to James Taylor's Gorilla album, there's every kind of song in the world on that one album. Moby Grape, they were always exploring different genres on one album. There'd be something very country, something strictly blues, you know, something kind of rock, you know. Bands back then kind of wanted to show you what their range of abilities were, you know. It was not till like the 80s, 90s when bands started doing one thing.
Right.
On a
and
record.
Why did that happen, you think?
I think that, again, was what we were talking about earlier with record companies kind of encouraged that, you know, this is what people want to hear from you. Don't do
anything
venture
else.
from that. Yeah, you know. And there's always that time in the history of recording where, you know, it kind of falls back into that where, you know, nobody wants to cross the street to hear you expand on your repertoire. You know, just do what sells records.
Do you think, Michael, that lasts for X amount of records with a band over a period of time?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of things that become a part of that scenario. I think any band over the years has to go through divorce, and bands have to evolve to grow. You know, I don't, maybe not. Stones kind of contradict that rule of thumb, and the Beatles, you know, but a lot of bands, you know, that seem to be a necessary growing pain. You know, was guys come and go. You know, and bands reform and take different paths musically. But making room for growth was always the battle you fought with the industry and, trying to stay with your audience,
It just occurred to me that Ted Templeman produced Minute by Minute and then the Van Halen first record at the same year.
Mm-hmm. He played us the demo he got of them. He goes, "You got to hear these guys." And it was like Pretty Woman. And it was, and Eddie, of course, was amazing. Listening to his guitar playing, I was like, wow, And Ted was already, signing him to the label and was going to do the record with him, and But it was like they came out of nowhere. They were kids like, hanging out at a music store in Pasadena, and playing gigs, of course, and doing what they did. But they were very young guys, And, they had this whole new take on rock and roll that Ted, was real excited about,
It's fascinating that even producers like Ted Templeman were really eclectic.
Mm-hmm. I think the business at the time, and I think it is today too, I hesitate to, like a lot of people go, "Oh, everything sounds the same." I don't think so. And there's nothing good out there. I don't think so. I think there's some remarkably great and inventive and new music. And when I say new, I mean, stuff that's harmonically unlike anything that's come before it. We were talking about that group, Lemon Twigs, And, I mean, it's just, to me, to hear something that Thundercat, there's things in there I recognize, and they but it's so harmonically inventive and melodically intriguing and inventive, but undeniably beautiful. It's not like you have to listen to it and go, "Whoa, that's weird. How do I wrap my head around that?" It's like it speaks to you, musically right off the bat. And then you spend the rest of the time going, "What is that?" I mean, it's almost like they're more in keeping with some of the early jazz acts, like when jazz got very progressive, how they, twisted melody, and they reinvented the approach to melody and chords, and it was beautiful. It was, what was happening was valid. And a lot of these bands, like those bands I mentioned, it's not that what they're doing is unfamiliar. It's just the way they're doing it is so unique and so interesting and contemporary in its own sense.
One of the people I interviewed, Christopher Cross, you sang on his record, on Ride Like the Wind. He told the story, you were in the same studio when they were working on that. And I mean, do you remember any of this?
Yeah, I remember it quite vividly, yeah. Michael was, in fact, I didn't even know Michael was producing records yet. I knew Mike as a keyboard player.
Yeah.
We had played on some sessions together, and he was always really very encouraging, because I always, and rightfully so, felt like, I don't know what I'm doing here, just forgive me if I play anything stupid,
That sounds like something he would say.
Yeah, no, but, and he was always very, encouraging, I'd look over him like, and but here he is producing records, and he was, I think, already signed on as a staff producer with Warner's, and he brought Christopher to Warner Brothers, and he said, "Hey, man, can you come over when you get done? Can you just drop by Studio B? I'm recording this new kid, and it's there's some stuff. Just a couple lines that take us an hour, you know. And literally, that's about all it took, or less, you know. But I went down and I heard this stuff, and I liked it. You know, really, it was catchy. It was really, you know, it caught my ear for sure. You know, I met Christopher, and you know, he was just, you know, this humble kid from Texas, you know, he was in the big city and came out to California to make a record, you know. And the stuff, all the tracks were really great, you know. They played Sailin' for me, and I was like, wow, it's really, really great stuff. And so Michael asked me to sing these backgrounds and on Ride Like the Wind, and that was the only thing we did that day. And it was, you know, it was over pretty quickly, and, you know, until I, you know, heard the record on the radio, you know, I was kind of amazed.
I want to play that.
And I've got such a long way to go, such a long way to go. Make it to the border of Mexico, so I ride like the wind.
That whole part there, you probably spent, what, 30 minutes doing all that?
Maybe.
If
yeah.
that?
Yeah, yeah.
Did Michael say, okay, this is what I want you to sing. Oh, okay, I'm just going to sing the answer part. I think Christopher told me that he had already sung it and you just replaced his part.
I think so, yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, and the song was indeed very catchy, you know, and I kind of already knew that it would probably be a hit, you know, but of course I had no idea what the future of the record really was, because I didn't even know Michael was producing records yet, you know. It was all a surprise to me, you know.
You've seen the skit of you, of who is it, Rick Moranis, I think?
Moranis, yeah.
Plays you going from studio, going to the studio and doing that.
I'm on the run, no time to sleep, to be free again. And I've got such a long way to go, such a long way to go. Make it to the border of Mexico, so I ride like the wind, ride like
Doing that. What do you think about that? It's hilarious, isn't it?
Well, you know, first of all, the first time I saw that on television, I had just left Pat Simmons' room. We were on the road back then, and we went back to the studio, and he goes, "Man, I got this pot you're not going to believe." He goes, we only take a couple hits, and it's like this stuff lamb-based you know. And so we're in his room and smoking a pot. I took a couple hits, and I literally had to go. You know, I mean, I had to go back to my room and lay down. You know, I remember I said to him, "Yeah, I gotta go." I said, "No, this is." And I made it to my room. I somehow got the key in the door, and I walked in, and I always left my TV on when I leave the room for the gig. So this thing is in progress on television. You know, this guy looks really familiar, and in this skit that's playing out, and I remember thinking, that guy really looks familiar, and you know, and it was Rick Moranis dressed as me, doing this, going into the studios, and they're playing Christopher's song, and I'm like, and I thought, I'm losing it, you know, that's what's happening. I'm having hallucinations, you know. That stuff was stronger than I think, you know. And then as it played out, I realized this is SCTV and it's a skit. Thank God for that, you know. It was hilarious, you know. I think they had some carpet commercial that the Doobie Brothers were the soundtrack to, and so I think Rick Moranis actually apologized to me years later when we were out with the Rock and Soul Review. He came to one of the gigs at Jones Beach, and he goes, "I just want to apologize for that." I said, "No, man." I said, "I've gotten more mileage out of that."
Oh my God,
yeah.
That's one of the best skits ever.
It was so hilarious. You know?
Now, you were so in demand to sing background vocals, yet your voice is so unique and it stands out so much, like in Peg, for example, on Steely Dan. And there's some really intricate harmonies in the chorus.
I know I love you better.
Those parts in there, were they difficult to learn?
Donald knew what he wanted me to sing, and when we first started to lay the first initial chord down, that we would double it. The second part was very close harmonies.
Yes.
And I was really struggling to keep my part, because I wasn't used to singing that close to myself,
Yeah,
especially.
there's a lot of half steps in
Yeah,
there. Yeah.
and so I remember saying to Donald, Donald, can we do it this way? Turn off the other part. Just teach me this part. Let me sing it. And so, because I'm not sure I can.
Would he play it on the piano and you would just, he'd say, oh, I want you to do these
probably
notes?
play it on the piano, or in any way, he taught me the singular part, then the next part, and it would turn off the part I just did.
Okay.
So I didn't have to hear that and sing against it. And it was in that way that I was able to kind of do the whole chord and the background part, and then double it. I would do it, each line separately, and then double it, the next one. And I didn't really hear the part until we finished them all, and then we played it back all together. And hadn't been for multi-track recording, I don't think, well, I wouldn't have done it in the first place. But the ability to not hear that part, meant all the difference in the world, because it was not something I was used to. Like people in Manhattan Transfer, really good jazz singers can do that stuff.
Yeah.
But I wasn't one of those guys.
Now, when he'd ask you to come in to sing on something like that, would you sing on a number of songs, or would it be one track, or how would they do that?
There might be a couple songs I would do in a day. Usually never more than two, because we would spend some time with each song. And then I would come back and do another one or two,
When you would sing harmony vocals, would they typically double parts? Was that a really common thing at the time?
Oh, yeah, most definitely, yeah. He always knew what he wanted, for the backgrounds, I think he was pretty much that way with everything, He kind of, even if it was somebody else was playing piano, he would, he knew how the chord should be voiced and how the rhythm of the part should be, and
And how about doubling with the Doobies, for example?
We'd always double track them pretty much.
Okay.
And sometimes I would sing with myself, for a certain sound. But a lot of times we sang as a group, and we'd all kind of just find our parts.
And would you sit around a mic and do that typically?
Yeah, a lot of times we would sing on maybe two mics, and it'd be like as many as three or four of us singing into two mics, and then we would double it. Yeah.
When you started recording your own records, did you have things that you didn't use with the Doobie Brothers?
One song that fits that storyline pretty good is "Real Love." I had actually, by that time, I was like a year behind when I was supposed to deliver my solo record to Warner Brothers, and they weren't worried about it because they would rather I keep the Doobie Brothers thing going, and they were giving me a lot of sway with my solo project. Like, just get to that when you get to it. Don't let it interfere with your next Doobie Brother record. And I felt the same way myself personally as far as songs go. I had Real Love. I had cut a track with Real Love, Jeff Porcaro on drums. I think I wrote the song with Patrick Henderson, and he played keyboards on it. I think he played organ on it, and Hadley Hawkins-Smith was on guitar, and Willie Weeks on bass. And it was a nice track. It felt great, and I really liked the track. But it was the best song I had at the moment, and we were getting ready to go in with the Doobies. And I remember thinking, I really, I want to put my best foot forward for the band. If this is the best song I have, it should go to the next Doobie Brother album. I'll write something else for my solo album. I have plenty of time to worry about that. So it was the best song I had at the time. So I figured it's something I should cut with the Doobies, and so we cut it, and I guess it became one of the singles off that next record. And I've always thought of it myself as a Doobie Brothers song.
Okay.
I wish I knew where that track I cut with those other guys was. I'd just like to hear it, but just to see how different it might have been from what we did, as the Doobies.
Was that something where you would sit down and say, okay, I need to write stuff for my solo record, and then that would be a process?
Yeah. I wrote a lot of stuff for that solo record with Ed Sanford and Randy Goodrum. my brother-in-law, Grady Walker, you know, and Harry Garfield and I wrote a song together. I wrote a song with Jackie DeShannon, the title track for that solo record with her. And that was a lot of fun. She was one of my favorite songwriters anyway, you know. But she had some great stories about the original Beatles tour she did when the Beatles first came to the United States. She was on that tour. And,
Wow.
and it was interesting stuff because, you know, the Beatles, they always had that kind of jangly guitar, you know, thing that really developed with the band by the time Beatles 6, you know, there were some really signature guitar riffs. And she was a big influence on that.
Interesting.
She had written a song, had a great big hit record called Every Time That You Walk in a Room, you know. And it had this great guitar lick, one of those all-time, you know, historic rock guitar licks is boom, 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 boom. And John Lennon loved that record, and he loved that guitar lick. And so you can almost hear his affectation of that on Every Little Thing and on some of the later Beatles songs. He kind of reinvented, you know, would reimagine that lick on some of the Beatles songs later. But he said every time I got on, he kind of scared me, you know, because he was so, you know, funny and, you know, kind of an unusual personality. And he said when I'd get on the 707, they had chartered a 707 to do the tour, and I'd be walking on with my suitcase and my guitar and trying to make my way down the aisle, and all of a sudden he would pop out right in front of me with his guitar, and he'd play the lick to every time he walked in the room. And he'd go, the greatest fucking guitar lick ever written. You know? And she said, I just never knew what to make of him, you know. But I just thought that was such a great story, you know.
Now, did you ever meet John Lennon?
No, I never did. Never did. I met George Harrison, and lovely guy, you know, and I met Paul and Ringo. And, such amazingly normal people for what they went through, you know. That was always my first takeaway with those guys was, these guys are just really nice guys that, you know, you wouldn't know that they were the Beatles, for God's sake, you know. There was no air of anything about them other than just really personable people, you know.
Did you have a favorite Beatles song?
I love it was more albums for me. Like
Okay.
Beatles 6, I loved Beatles 6 album. I loved the second Beatles album, Beatles 65, No Reply. That to me was when their songwriting started to kind of get muscular, you know, and they had such great bridges on all those songs, you know. The first record was, you know, great too, you know, and I was taken by their sensibilities musically, you know, how much they really encompassed with just being a four-piece band, you know, they really encompassed a lot harmonically, you know. And the incredibly smart production of those records, like, you know, some of those songs, what really, you knew it was the chorus when all of a sudden a tambourine, a single tambourine came in
Right.
and just started playing 16th notes, and it was like, wow, you know, it just had such a huge effect on, you know, because it was such a small palette of colors to work with, you know. But they did it really well, you know, and then they really developed that in subsequent records. And
In some of the interviews I've done of people that were musicians from the 60s on, they always talk about trying to do something new.
our examples were bands that did that, you know. Beatles were pretty diverse.
Yes.
Band, you know, they did all kinds of different, it was
Yeah.
everything from accordions to pump organs on their records. I mean, they were always very inventive, you know. Stones, same thing. Look at the incarnations of the Rolling Stones.
Right.
They started out as strictly a blues band, you know, playing American music pretty much, that luckily for them, most Americans had never heard, you know. It's All Over Now was a big R&B record on R&B radio. Most white kids in the suburbs had never heard that song in their lives till the Stones did it, you know. In fact, the Valentinos, Bobby Womack and his brother, I think, had that band. They had a hit with it when the Stones came out with it. and it kind of eclipsed their record, But he said, I remember I was so disappointed that these cats came along and scooped us on our own song. He goes, and then I got my first check from, he goes, I wasn't so unhappy anymore. They went from that to this wearing wizard costumes and doing all this kind of strange English theater rock kind of stuff, theatrical rock kind of stuff. Great stuff, I mean, what a songbook for a band to have,
Right.
And then they came back around to this very funky, kind of blues-oriented, but with a different take that was all their own, with Sticky Fingers and those albums, It's an amazing metamorphosis that a lot of those bands went through, Eric Clapton too,
Yeah.
all the different incarnations of Eric Clapton.
How did radio change from the 70s to the 80s, for example?
Well, I think there was always this heave and haw that I sensed with radio, where radio was kind of forced to open up because of some other element that, reared its ugly head, on the scene, like FM radio or independent labels or whatever it might be, that spurred these changes that probably wouldn't have happened any other way, And then the industry and the major labels always found a way to wrestle it back into something that they could package and manage and control. And the only label I ever knew that didn't seem to do that, except in fact they had a whole stable of artists that might never really sell records to speak of, but that they were proudest of having those artists on their rosters, as proud as having those artists as any other, probably prouder, like Warner's, for me, I always admired the hierarchy at Warner's, Mo and those guys, because they really loved the fact that they were the label that Little Feat and Bonnie Raitt were on. Long before those artists really started selling a lot of records, they were more than happy to nurture and encourage those artists. Randy Newman, until Short People, Randy didn't really have a big top 40 hit, album, but everybody was doing his songs. Everybody loved his songs. Ry Cooder, everybody loved Ry Cooder. Anybody that had some taste in music knew those artists, and Warner's was the place for those artists to be.
The Warners had Mo Ostin, but they had all these A&R people that were all producers, like Ted. They were, I guess, would they be staff producers?
Yeah, I think they kind of created that merging of the A&R department and the staff production.
Michael Amardian being another one.
Yeah, those guys made the decisions concerning the artists and what records to be released, just like a more independent A&R station department would have done years earlier. So they were their own best and worst critics. They would sit and listen to records they all produced and decide which was a stinker and which was, And I remember Michael Amardian telling me one minute by minute when they all sat around and listened to it, they all went, yeah, these guys are over, And Ted was the lone ranger in that meeting who said, no, man, I'm telling you, I think we know. And we used to be able to pick our own singles, or at least Ted did, So it was the guys making the records who were picking the singles. And that was also a unique, and as you walk down the hall, they were filled with platinum albums that were made by the A&R department.
Well, Michael told me that about Minute by Minute, and that people are like, no, that's not.
These guys are over, yeah.
And then Ted was like, no, we're going to do this, and Mo was.
Mo always had total faith in he was like Berry Gordy in that sense. He had total faith in the people he had hired to do the job. He really let them do their job, and he let the artists be themselves. He somehow he understood the value of that. That, if he was going to be the head of a label, he wanted it to be creative. He wanted it to be a creative center for whatever artistic value you could eke out of popular music.
Okay, so when that became a huge hit, then what did Ted say? I told you guys so. I mean,
I think we all kind of knew what a crapshoot it was at that point, and nobody was more surprised than we were. I remember when that album was done, I had rough mixes of Minute by Minute. And there was one guy, I trusted his opinion. He was crazy as a loon, but his history in the music business, you know, I knew that he knew good music when he heard it, you know. So I called him up and I said, I got some rough mixes of the new album. He goes, all right, well, I'm going shopping, so you want to meet me at May Company on the parking lot and we'll play it in my car. I'll tell you what I think. Okay. So I met him and I'm sitting on the parking lot. I play him the whole record. The whole time he's listening to it very astutely, very intently, you know. And last song finishes, he goes, because that's the biggest piece of shit I've ever heard. Something like that. And I remember thinking, I knew it. He's right. It's a piece of shit. I've ruined the band. I've taken the band down the shitter with me, you know. And, you know, so, you know, I spent the next few months between then and when we went on the road again, you know, and I came back and we just gotten back and it was right the first of the year, the album had come out. And I spent that whole time just, you know, like eating stale pizza and smoking pot and living in my bathrobe, you know, in total depression, thinking, you know, I'd leave once in a while to go play golf at this 3-part golf course down the street. The whole time just pondering, you know, how I'm gonna, you know, go move to Costa Rica or something and never come back, you know. And I had talked to the manager one day and he goes, you know, the record had just been released. He goes, things sold like, I don't know, some big number, you know, 7,000 units the first week. He goes, looks like it's going to sell 30,000 the next week. We got orders for, because things really taken off, you know. Singles doing, you know, I'm like, what? You know. And it was a total surprise to all of us, you know. And I think we had wound up in Japan right about the time, right just shortly after that. I think we went over to Japan and Australia. We had to leave town again. And while we were there, something happened and we were tired and, you know, when we toured, you know, we were, you know. And I remember we broke up at Japan. The band just was, fuck it, that's it, we're done, you know. We're all going to go our separate ways from Japan. You know, Keith and I decided to go to Hawaii and for a little R&R, you know, which meant that that's the closest distance between us and some pot, you know. We're going to go to Hawaii. So, you know, back then, you know, you didn't take drugs in Japan.
No,
you know.
Paul McCartney found that out.
Yeah, you know. So we broke up. That was it, you know. And somehow on the flight to Hawaii, by the time we got to Hawaii, we got the phone call, and it's like, you know, we have counted you guys out 1,000 times. Why now, when you've got a #1 record on the charts? It's going to be #1 next week, and the album might even be #1 too, you know. So now you decide to break up, you know, and we're like, what? You know. And then, you know, we got the call from Pat, who was kind of the conscience of the band as far as any of us, you know, ever knew, you know. And at that point in time, you know, and he says, so what do you think? You know, we got a #1 record. We can't, you know. So we decided, okay, we're not going to break up, you know. And by that spring, we were touring with this #1 album and selling out 3-4 nights at Pine Knob and Universal Amphitheater. It was just this whole you know, the crazy stories of the music business, you know. Prior to that, we were playing all these tertiary markets because the album before that had not done very well. Mm-hmm. So we didn't dare go into the major markets to try to play because we wouldn't draw any crowds, you know. So we're playing like Odessa, Texas, and, you know, Amarillo, you know, all these places, which are great cities. And it turned out to really work in our favor because by the time we had this #1 record.
Sure, you built up all this demand.
You know, we had kind of endeared ourselves to all these secondary markets, and they all traveled 60 to 100 miles to come hear us play in the major cities again. You know? So the whole thing really conspired to put the band, you know, in a whole other light, you know, commercially. And we never understood what our commercial success was about. We really did not, you know. And it wasn't like we made decisions based on that. We didn't know anything about that anyway. We just tried to make a record that we thought we could, you know, walk away from and be okay with, you know.
When you guys were touring back then, where would you go? Would you play Europe
Well, if we
a
played
lot?
Japan, we usually played Australia.
Okay.
You know, and New Zealand,
Mm-hmm.
Hong Kong, you know, maybe Singapore, you know. We played Bangkok that year, you know, and the one and only time I remember us playing Bangkok, you know.
Would you do different legs, like do legs in Europe? And
Yeah,
then,
we did
and then,
play Europe a few times, and that was right when the punk scene was starting, and it was this whole thing that we weren't really like, what is this? You know, our audiences, you know, these were like the Reading Festival. We played the Reading Festival, and
Wow.
you know, we were a rock band, and you know, we didn't know if they were going to like us or hate us. We, you know, we were an American band, and you know, we hadn't played there that much, and some band had canceled, and so the band before us was a kind of a local band, and they got up on stage and they were playing songs that they played in the pub up the road, you know, and something like that, and the first time I ever saw anything like it. It was real muddy that day. It was had rained and there was mud everywhere. So this band starts the song off, their first song, and they're not 3 bars into the song, and giant clobs of mud started pelting the stage, you know. And these people were running for their lives, you know. They never got through a song, you know. And I'm on the side of the stage, and there's John McPhee and I, and we're going, oh boy, this is not good, you know. And we didn't know what to expect, but we got through this set, and we didn't get hit with any mud or anything. But I remember that was like the first kind of inklings of this new kind of movement in the audience, and there were some bands on the bill that were unlike anything I'd ever heard, you know, very raw and very, you know, and the crowd seemed to really be on the same page with them, you know. But there were some great bands that we played with. I think on that gig, Thin Lizzy was one of the bands, and but you could tell that the landscape was changing. You know, we were getting closer to the '80s, and you know, into the '80s. It's kind of a new wave, you know.
Did labels say you need to tour more, or did you talk about these things?
Well, back in the '70s, records were your real source of revenue. If you got a hit record, that was the 3 lemons in a row, you know, that bingo, you know. And so you toured to promote that record,
right,
in the hopes it would be a hit and that you would sell a lot of records because you made a lot of money as writers, and you made, you know, as artists' royalties were, you know. Somewhere in between that and the '80s, record companies arbitrarily decided, we're not going to pay you that royalty rate we decided on that you signed your name to, because it costs a whole lot more to make these CDs, you know, than it does to make vinyl, and it's a different thing now, and we're going to have to lower your, you know. So we got to be very quickly, records were not the revenue source anymore, and touring evolved into where touring, and now it's like records are like party favors.
Right.
You make them just to pass them out,
yeah,
and hopes that it brings people to your gigs, you know.
So they figured out that they could pocket that money and then force the artist to go out and have touring be the main source of income.
Yeah, well, you know, it kind of turned around to where, you know, somehow mysteriously our royalty rates were not necessarily anything inked into place, you know. It was like, oh, we've decided we're going to pay you a third of that, you know, because our costs are really, you know, and you know, it was always that thing of, well, you guys haven't recouped yet. You know, well,
right,
this record just sold 3 million copies. Yeah, but the first 2 records, you know, we were still recouping on that. You know, there was always that cat and mouse thing with, you know, but, you know, did I ever think I would wax nostalgic for those days? Because now I don't have a clue what the record business is, you know, or if there is such a thing as a record business, you know. And, you know, many times I talk to guys, especially guys from that period, going, well, we're still making records. We're not sure why, you know. It's not a source of revenue, certainly, you know, but we do it because we don't know what else to do, you know. It's what we've always done, you know.
Could you have imagined a future like this compared to you guys getting together in a room in a recording studio, miking things up and just playing it live?
There was so much I couldn't imagine, you know, like when the whole thing of sampling someone else's record and writing your own lyrics to it and singing their melody, but, just your own lyrics, and now it's your song and your record. I've tried to imagine myself many times walking into Warner Brothers in the 70s with like Sting's record of, Any Breath You Take, and just arbitrarily writing a whole new lyric to it and singing it to the A&R department going, I think this should be our next single. What do you guys think? It's like they would have had someone come and take me away,
Right.
But that became what the record business was all about in the late 80s, and I have to admit, people got really creative with that. It was so alien to any sensibilities that I had about writing a song and recording that song. And, I was in a record store once and they were playing What's Going On. I think it was the track of What's Going On. And it was a young artist, female artist singing, totally different lyrics, totally different.
And you thought, what's going on?
Yeah, and I remember I saw the young girl behind the counter and I just, out of curiosity, I said, excuse me, I said, do you know what this song is? Do you know who wrote this song? She goes, she named some artist, I go, no. I said, that's actually you know who Marvin Gaye is? He wrote that song. And, this song is a totally different lyric with a whole different, that's not who wrote, and it was a girl just looked at me like I had two heads, like, what the fuck is this old fool talking about, And it was, it's when I realized I was really out of step with what was going on,
What is a perfect song, anybody's song, that you think is a perfectly written song?
To me, it was Teddy Randazzo who wrote the songs for Little Anthony and the Imperials, Hurt So Bad, To me, those were perfect. I mean, to me, when I heard those songs and I heard the structure of those songs, and the way those songs change keys as they go, but you never feel it. You never, you just accept that this is how the song goes,
Right.
But it's really an exercise in a beautiful application of theory, But I remember when I heard those songs, and something like Smokey Robinson's "Ooh Baby Baby." It's a very simple song, but there's something perfect about those songs, Whether it's the simplest thing in the world that they're doing, or it's complex in its own nature, but it sounds natural. That, to me, is what makes a perfect song. Like Burt Bacharach and Hal David, they would put these 6/4 bars in the middle of their song. That's like a big no-no in pop music. Any A&R guy go, don't ever do that. They're gonna people are gonna fall out of their cars. Trying to figure out what just happened, and it's not true. But because if you do it well, it sounds like the most natural thing in the world. It's just very hooky all of a sudden, And people would Steely Dan was such a defiance of all the rules of pop music, All of a sudden there's these kind of jazz chord progressions, these, very sophisticated melodies, not to mention lyrics that, were very sophisticated, in their comic value and their meaning, and then, and they're the darlings of pop radio for 40 years.
Right.
How does that happen, So I think those are, like songs like Peg and Asia and even FM, I remember when FM came out, I thought, well, that's Steely Dan kind of asleep at the wheel. They're just doing that for a movie. It's one of their throwaway songs. Now when I hear that song on the radio, I'm amazed at what a great song it is. It's no half effort at all. It's just every bit as ingenious as anything Donald and Walter ever wrote. So much of the music from that era, it took me years to really appreciate it for what it is. I remember I had my likes and my dislikes. And it was years later that I really came to appreciate some of those records that I didn't think much of when they first came out.
If you're driving in your car and one of your songs comes on, do you listen to it?
Probably, yeah. When I'm in a store and one of my songs comes on, I try to pretend like I'm not listening to it. I've even had people go, yeah, I can't believe you're like walking around looking at tomatoes and your song's playing, don't you? And in truth, I'm listening very intently, and I'm going, yes, But, and I remember when I first came to California, going to my dentist or something, and on the elevator, Muzak. Remember Muzak?
Of course.
And I remember thinking, if I ever hear one of my songs on Muzak, I'll know I made it, you know. And I think years later I heard Minute by Minute or something by the 101 strings, you know,
Right.
on an elevator somewhere. And I remember going, yeah, you know. And it was just certain little, you know, idiosyncratic things that you thought of. If that ever happens to me, I'll know that, you know, I kind of made my mark somehow, you know. And that was one of them, you know.
With all the hits you've had, would you say that you never know what's going to be a hit?
Yeah, I think it's a little of both, you know. And even with songs that weren't mine, but with songs that were mine, I remember thinking, yeah, What a Fool Believes should be the single. I agreed with Ted on that. I didn't know if it was going to be a hit or not, but, you know, I thought that was the best, that was one of the things from the record that might be a single, you know. There were times when I thought other things that should be the single, and I was dead wrong, you know. And, I should have listened to other people. When I was a producer, you know, when I produced my wife, I always inherently picked the wrong single, you know. And I would fight with the record company about it, like, oh, this thing got to happen. I'm the producer here, you know. And, you know, and I'd go to head with the A&R guy, and usually he was right and I was wrong, you know.
Would band members fight about those things, like with the Doobies, or would you just, would they accept whatever Ted would say?
Yeah, ours was always a, you know, kind of a group consensus, and we were all pretty comfortable with whatever the majority thought, you know. I think we're still that way. I think we still very loosely approach our records in terms of none of us are looking to take. I probably suffered from that more than the other guys. Even Tommy and Pat, who were totally responsible for the band's success, as far as I'm concerned. You know, the band was huge when I joined them. You know? But I never saw those guys ever try to control the. You know, I remember I was so desperately afraid that I was going to ruin the band that it caused a different reaction. I mean, I was like the scrawny guy who walks in a bar and I want to pick a fight with everybody, you know, because I feel like the scrawny guy who walked in the bar. I remember thinking, you know, I got to make sure this works out right. This record, we play it right, and it turns out, you know, and I sometimes would get kind of overbearing with, I tortured the poor drummers, you know, and Jeff Baxter, you know, I tortured him, you know. And here's the guy that got me the gig, you know. And I'm, you know, giving him a fit over what he's playing, you know. It didn't bring out the best in me at times, you know. But those guys were remarkably forgiving, you know. And poor Keith, I mean, when we did Minute by Minute, it came down to me and him in the studio alone, you know. I think Ted, to keep me from, you know, going into like psychotic an episode, he said, look, guys, take a break. Everybody go inside. Keith, you stay there. He goes, Mike, why don't you play it down with Keith? Get the track that feels good to you, you know. And because we were going for this kind of hypnotic, almost machine-like 6/8 feel, you know.
Yeah.
And I tortured the poor guy over it, you know. And he was playing it right the whole time, you know. Any one of those takes was probably fine. But I was so neurotic, you know, in that moment. And so he and I played it down. And I had a kind of a funky sound on the piano, but I thought, well, I'll get a better piano sound later. And I couldn't play it to his track later. I couldn't play it the way, it was just the way we played it together that made the feel of the song anywhere close to, you know, what I guess we were looking for, you know. But, you know, by the end of that session, and then the guys all came back in and they all put their parts on that drum and piano track.
What do you think was difficult about getting the feel to that?
Well, I think when I was writing the song, I had this inkling that if this thing could feel almost hypnotic, and later on, that kind of music kind of came into vogue, you know, with drum machines and loops and stuff, you know, where the groove was so constant that it kind of hypnotized you. And there was something about that song I felt had that quality that it could feel that way, but every time we played it, it felt more like a blues shuffle, you know.
Right.
And I didn't want it to feel like a blues. I wanted it to feel like a dunk, 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 you know. And so, and not speed up and not slow down, because with a shuffle, you typically do kind of move to either side, you know.
Yeah.
And what's what most people would call swing, you know.
Did you play that with a click?
No, we didn't. Keith, unfortunately, bore the brunt of that, and we tried to omit all the swing out of it that we could, you know.
I want to play the beginning of the song here.
Hey, don't worry, I've been lied to. I've been here many times before. Girl, don't you worry, I know where I stand. I don't need this love, I don't need your hand. I know I could turn, thinking you'd be gone, that I must be prepared anytime to carry on. But minute by minute by minute by minute, I keep holding on. I'll be holding on. I'll be holding minute by minute by minute by minute. I keep holding on.
It's incredibly steady,
Yeah, and
really steady.
it's hard for me to listen to it just because of the excruciating pain I put.
So you even listening to it, it takes you back to that, doesn't it?
Yeah, it kind of does, you know. But you know, Keith did a remarkable job. You know, it's and we all miss him. You know, it's just hearing him play again.
Yeah.
You know, brings back a certain kind of melancholy, I think, you know, for all of us. But yeah, he earned his money that day. You know, and I think you know it was kind of like we kind of had that feeling that if we could just reach that kind of really rock steady 6/8 feel, that the song might take on a certain personality.
That's the actual take right there. That's
Yeah,
the keyboard and drum pass.
Yeah, and the piano was almost, the intro was almost kind of an exercise to set up the feel so that we would fall into that feel, you know. And of course we rehearsed it, you know, a few times, so he knew what I was doing. A lot of people say, well, that's such a complicated piano intro. It's not really, if you know where one is. It's just triplets, you know, and it's much simpler than it sounds, you know. But we kind of used it to just set the feel of the song up, you know.
Can you play it a little bit of that?
Yeah, that's all it was, you know.
Amazing. I'd love to get you to, if you want to just sing one song or something, if that's cool. Or
Sure. You know, speaking of, you know, songs and what's the perfect song or all that, one of the, I always, you know, from the first day I heard Ray Charles singing all these country songs that might have been mistakenly thought of as kind of simplistic compositions, you know, by, you know, 3-chord songs or 4-chord songs. That to me was the real genius of Ray Charles, and he you know, took it to that level of commerciality and all things considered, you know, that make a hit record, because the audience picked right up on it. You know, when he sang a lyric, you got the feeling that he'd never sing that song the same way twice, that this was a moment, and this is what he was saying in that moment, and it would never be the same, even if he sang it, you know. And so one of those songs that I always loved hearing, and I don't know if I can do it on this piano, but...
You give your hand to me, and then you say hello. I can hardly speak, my heart is beating so, oh, anyone can tell. You think You don't know the one who thinks of you at night, who longs to kiss your lips, longs to hold you tight. To you I'm just a friend, that's all I've ever been. You don't know me. I never knew the art of making love, though my heart aches with love for you. Afraid and shy, I let my chance go by. Chance you might love me too. You give your hand to me, then you say goodbye. I watch you walk away beside that lucky guy, to never, never know the one who loves you so. You don't know me. You don't know me.
That was great. Michael, thank you so much for
Rick,
doing
thank
this.
you. My pleasure.
Really, it's been fantastic to meet you here in person and to talk to you about your career.
No, thanks.
Thanks so
Thanks
much.
for having me. All right.
It's a wrap. That was amazing.
Oh, thanks. Thank you.
That was beautiful.
I never get through without hitting a few stinkers, but you know, it's real life.
That was really, really great.
Thanks, guys.